Hi, welcome to Enhancing Your Model. In today's session, we're going to talk about customizing your Metamodel and updating diagram templates for Irwin EABP. So as soon as you customize your Metamodel, the best way to take advantage of that is by updating diagram templates, and you can actually visualize some of the changes that you've made. As a refresher, the main terms that we're speaking about are model, and a model is a container where you store your data. One model can contain thousands of diagrams and thousands of objects. An object type is a thing that represents some aspect of the enterprise. An object instance is an actual example of the underlying data type, and an object property is something that defines the data element, so a name, a category, description, things like that. This is viewed in Object Explorer. You can also view this information in Model Explorer. So in Model Explorer, you can also see the models, the object types, object instances, and object properties. You can actually see here the object properties are shown by these columns such as category, implementation, criticality, things like that. So these are different properties right here. Now, object properties, as we've mentioned, are the data elements defined for a given object, and they can be of different kinds. So in this example, gather software requirements has these different properties. For instance, its name, alternate name, category, implementation, decomposition number, current state, and future state. And all of these properties live on tabs, and tabs are shown at the top: general, description, objective, etc. And then there are definitions of these data types. So these different data types are sometimes single-line text, sometimes they're drop-down lists or whole numbers or checkboxes. There are additional data types for your properties, such as date, time, URL, or a multi-line text box. Just so you know, the description is a multi-line text box, as well as objective and specification. Those are some of the defaults that come with a process object, but all objects come predefined with a description field, which is a multi-line text field. Now, to customize the Metamodel, we would go into Model Explorer, and in Model Explorer, it's done in the design view. So there are three views in Model Explorer: object administration and design, and this is done in the design view. So in the design view, you have your properties, panes, and associations. If you recall from the previous pages, previous screens, a property is the detail of an object, a pane is a tab that it lives on, and an association is a relationship. So today we're looking at objects and their properties. If we choose a process object, on the right you can actually see all the default properties of a process, or all the properties that are in this particular model. To create a new one, simply go to File, New. And when you do that, you're able to choose the data type. So if you recall from the last screen, from the last slide, we looked at different types of data. There were drop-down lists, there were checkboxes, multi-line text boxes, single-line text. There are 14 different data types in here. You get to choose the data type. You also get to choose the name of the property, which we can see right here. You get to see the name, the script name, and then the data type. And once you've done those, made the selections, click on OK. And you will now choose a pane to put that on. So if we go back to panes, these are the existing panes. We can create a new pane or a new tab, call it New Tab, and then under Associations, go to Property Types. We can choose the property we just made called New Property, move it over to the right. Once you move it over to the right, that completes the creation process for your property and the placement of it on a pane, and it looks like that. So we've literally made a new tab called New Tab, and we've created a property called New Property, and it's a drop-down list. So that is something we did, and that was a really simple process for the creation of that. Now, sometimes you'll notice when you're on diagrams, there are properties that have a special way of looking. So if you notice right here, this CompTab Plus is an application that's been highlighted. It has multiple properties that have been visualized on the diagram. So one of those is 150, which is the number of users. So you can see in the top right corner, it says 150, and that's the number of users. You can also see the contract type is gold, and that's shown by this little gold icon. It is of low criticality, which is the top left corner icon, and it's a non-standard for enterprise, and that's the little red check mark. So those are different properties that have been highlighted using a visual indicator on the diagram. But the main purpose of me showing this to you is so that you realize it's part of your diagram template. And the diagram template is something that determines how things look on a diagram. So every diagram has a palette, and the palette is what determines what something looks like. So here we have 4 different examples. We have a process level 1, which is a value chain diagram. We have a process flow level 4 diagram towards the right. On the bottom left is the application architecture, and on the bottom right is the org chart. So these are 4 different diagrams. You'll notice each one of them has a different palette. So the different palette actually shows us that it is a whole different, almost like a stencil. So different things are allowed on the diagram, and they have a different look and feel. So when we talk about creating diagram templates, the diagram templates will determine what a new diagram should look like and what rules it should follow. And so a diagram template will determine multiple things. It will determine the diagram rules, so whether it's generic, dynamics, hierarchy, data flow, or entity, and we covered that in a previous module, so you can review that information. It will determine what is available on the new object palette, so both the objects and the connectors, whether they're just lines or associations. It will determine diagram properties such as object and connector grid snap, as well as diagram items. If you add anything to the diagram, if you wish to have anything like a title or version control, etc., that is part of your template. And then consistency options as well. So these are all different things that are part of your template, and we recommend creating a new diagram based on a template. Even if you're creating a brand new template, you can also use the same rule. So when you're working with a new diagram, when you set up a palette, you're first of all doing that, and you're setting up the palette. You're deciding what should be available on the diagram, the objects, the connectors or associations. You are also determining the diagram rule and category, which you can see on this tab right here. So the rule and the category, as well as its diagram title, and the title can be added. When you insert title, you can do that. And then, of course, lastly, in order to make a diagram a template, you have to go to the status tab and check it off as a template. So you can actually see that right here. You've checked it off as a template, and now anybody else coming in is able to use this diagram template in order to create their own diagrams. And so they will be able to take advantage of the palette and all the things you've pre-configured for that diagram template. Now, when you are working with a template, whether you're starting to create one from scratch or you're updating an existing one, we often need to modify a palette. And palettes can be modified in a variety of ways. It's pretty easy to modify a palette. The ability to do something is constrained by the objects and properties and associations that are in the meta model. And you also have to have the appropriate access rights. So this whole section is really all about having administrative access rights. So in this case, also, you need to have administrative access rights. So when you're starting out, you can add an object or you can import palette objects. And we'll first talk about importing palette objects. So to import palette objects, you would simply right-click on your palette and choose to import palette objects. And when you do that, it will come up with a new dialog, and you can choose from where you wish to import things. You would select the name of a diagram. Let's say it was, one of these diagrams. You choose a diagram, its palette comes up, and then you can either import selections. If you're only choosing a couple of items, you can do that, or import all. So this allows you to replicate whatever was in that other palette into this diagram. Sometimes you're actually not going to be able to import things, but you will set up a palette from scratch. So in that case, you would right-click on the palette and create new object. So once you've chosen to add a new object on the palette, if you right-click and do Add Object, you can choose. You can choose the object type that you're working with, so whether it's an application, a business rule, connector set, etc. And then you can also define its category. So that allows you to specify what something looks like on that diagram based on the object type and the category. And then you would choose under the appearance its symbol size and style. So if something is a rectangle, of course you choose a rectangle. You have an ability to choose from any one of these other symbols that are there, and later we'll talk about adding an image. So you can have an image also available as a symbol. And lastly, you would choose the text. And the text for an object can be centered. It can be aligned vertically, and you can also left align. You don't have to center the text. It's up to you, and that's why the option is there. Once you've added an object, you can add either connectors or association lines. And the associations are only available to be added for the object types that are already on the palette. So if you've added, for instance, a process and an organization, then you're able to add the process to organization association. But if you haven't added the organization, then you won't be able to add that line. So the lines, the association lines, only work for the objects that have already been added. And the association lines are distinguished by having an object-object name. So it's really specific to which object it connects to each other, whether it's a process to process, organization to process, etc. And always just check what it says in parentheses, because you might have multiple association types between the same two objects. Styles are something that can be added for a template. You should have styles for objects, and they can be specific to a template. You can assign them to templates. You can assign styles to objects whenever you're working with your diagram templates. And a style is determining what something looks like. So it's color, the border color, the color of the object, the color of the font, the type of font, things like that. Those are all your styles. If you're just doing a one-off, then you can use an appearance change, but otherwise, most likely you're going to do a style. So we're going to create a diagram template, and we'll create some objects on it, and we'll set that as a template. In order to do that, we've gone into the modeler, and in the modeler, we'll create a brand new diagram. When you go in to create a new diagram, as we said, it's best to base it on a template. And I recommend sorting the diagrams by diagram rule, so now you can actually see all the diagrams of a certain rule. If you remember, generic allows you to create a diagram that's the most flexible one. So let's base it on, there's nothing here that's just truly generic, so let's say that we wanted to create a template based on the application architecture. We've mentioned that template a couple of times, so let's go ahead and do that. And you can see what the palette looks like. So the palette is right there. And we'll call this the template app architecture practice. And I'll put this is your title here, so in case you ever insert it, and you'll be able to see that. So now you'll notice when we go in to do that, we'll have a diagram of category application architecture. Now, if we're truly creating a brand new template, the first step would be to create a new category. So we should always have a brand new category. So for this purpose, I'm going to, and let's call this something totally different. Let's call this application exercise, architecture exercise, and we'll just grab that as the name for our category. And I know that seems a little bit silly right now, but the reason why that's important is because if we were to ever propagate the palette, it would write over any of the other diagrams. So we'll call this application-architecture exercise, AAEX. And then it's really important to actually choose that. So once you set that, and then choose it. If you remember, we have to set a diagram as a template by going to the status tab. So that's something we also have to choose right here. But we'll save that for the end. So for now, I'll just hit OK to set the category. So you can see right there that the category has been updated. And now this is the palette. So if we wanted to add something brand new to the palette, we would right-click, do Add Object, and go through those 3 steps that we just outlined, the object, the appearance, and the text. So for instance, if we wanted to add a brand new object, so here we have applications. Let's say we wanted to add a technology object. We have the ability to do that. So we can go and choose technology, choose its category, go to the Appearance tab, decide what shape it should be. Let's say it has rounded corners, so this is a good one. And if we want the text to be centered, it'd be like that. Of course, under Appearance, we should also choose the style. So we have some styles here already. So if we have a technology style we want to use, we can just do that. And there's the preview of what that looks like. And then we can hit OK. So now we have a cluster that we added. You can test it by adding a new one onto the diagram. If we hit F6 to zoom in on this object, we can see what that looks like. We hit F6 again. So fairly small font, but that's part of the style. One of the things that you can do to modify the style once you've set it on the palette is to now go to the Format menu, and you can actually choose what this looks like. So we can choose, for instance, the fill color. So let's say the fill color is this kind of a beigey color. So we can do that. We can also go and choose the outline color. We can choose what the font looks like. If we're happy with this, we can apply this to the palette. We can actually update the style. And that will update the style for the application that I've chosen, and will update it everywhere in the model. And for me right now, I want to do that. If I didn't want to do that, I would say no. So if I hit yes, you can see right there, my palette, my cluster is now been updated, and that's the new style. Okay. I also am going to delete this object. I don't need to keep this new application I was using it just to try my palette item. I also have the ability to add now a line because I have a technology object, so I can add something between a technology and whatever exists in the meta model, for instance, technology to entity, or that's already on the palette. If I had application to technology, I can also add that as well. So let's say I add that and add the line for me. And lastly, I can also import something from another diagram. So if I right-click to import palette from diagram, I can choose a completely different palette. And this gives you a list of all the diagrams in your model. So you can choose, for instance, and this gives you the categories of this diagram. So you can sort by category and decide what kind of category you're looking at. Let's say application services. This will show you the objects that are available. And let's say you wanted to bring in a service. So let's say existing service, you can do that. You can do existing and future, and perhaps service to application line or association line. So we can import that selection. And once it's done, hit OK and close, and you'll see them right there at the bottom left. So that allows you to see the things you've just imported in. And now we'll need to make sure to go to the properties for the diagram, go back into status, and set this as a template. And I always like to call my templates Z templates, so they're alphabetically sorted to the bottom. You don't have to do that. That will not determine whether this is a template or not. Really setting the status tab and setting it as a template will do that for us. And now we can test it by closing this template. And now we can do File, New Diagram. When it's brand new like this, you just make sure you click the Refresh button. And now here it is, Z Template Application Architecture Exercise. We can see it appears, and we can see this is the palette. So if we wanted to, we can make a new diagram, but even just being able to see it here, for me, is good. It's enough. So back to the slides for a moment. This shows you what you have to do to create your template. It shows you about the status tab, setting that as a template. The last thing that we're going to cover today is working with images. So images in Irwin EABP can be useful, once again, for your templates. So they can be used instead of the standard shapes that the Casewise suite, the Casewise gallery has, but using these images that you might have somewhere else. You might have a whole gallery of images somewhere. So you can actually bring them in. You go to File, New from the gallery, and the gallery can be launched from any diagram. When you do File, New, that allows you to choose images that you have somewhere available to you. So if you just select all the ones here, for instance, if you do Open in a folder, that will allow you to import them in. So when you click Open, that will import them into your gallery and make them available for you and any other user of the suite. And what we recommend is that you name your images. They will actually be given the name of the file if you're doing an import like this. These may be wordy names. It would be great if you actually gave the images some sort of name that's a representation of where they're being used. So you can actually see right here, some of these images are EA Application Standard Approved, EA Application Standard in Progress. So that's a really helpful name. because it tells me that it's used for EA model, the application object, and when the application is standard approved and when the application is standard in progress. So that tells me what's going on right there. So to assign a picture to an object, if we go back to modifying the template, we can edit the properties of an existing object that's already on the palette. And you can go back to the Appearance tab. So you can access the Appearance tab when you're brand new creating an object on the palette or when you're editing the object on the palette. So when you do Edit Properties, go to the Appearance tab. And now you can go to the Gallery picture. And in the Gallery picture, you can choose a new image from your gallery. So the ones you see on the left here are ones that have already been added. If you click on New, that will allow you to choose something from the gallery. So there's your gallery, and you can choose an object, choose where its text should appear, and then you have the result. So we'll do that in our sample template. So we'll go back and reopen up this template. And one of the things we added was the cluster object. So what we can do is you can double click on cluster, or you can right click, edit properties, same place that it takes you to. And now in here, if we go to the Appearance tab, we have the symbol icon. Click on this object, click on picture to add a new one. You can also choose one of these existing ones. If we click on picture, that allows me to see what's in my gallery. So if I choose new, the whole gallery comes up and it's right here. I can maximize it to be able to see more images. If you do File New, that will allow you to import something in from your computer. We're just going to work with what we have. So if we choose an image, let's say this, you can always choose a database image or a server image. You can also search. So since our images are well named, we can see what everything is, whether they are technologies or applications or services. So I'm going to choose a technology object. So I will choose this EA Technology App Server logo and choose Insert at the bottom right corner. So now it's available for me. I can specify what's going to happen to the text. And we'll just do below outside shape. And now it's this funny looking rectangle. So if you're using an image that's round, perhaps let's make the proportions square. So we can do 32 by 32, which will make it rather large, but it will work for the image, and we can test it just by dragging it on to the diagram. So now here is our image. That's it. Image chosen. I will, of course, once again delete this from the diagram because a template should always be blank. So to summarize, a template allows you to choose the palette, allows you to choose the diagram rule and its category, as well as the options for, on the diagram tab, what is the default line behavior, whether or not you want to show line arches, what is the shape behavior, grid snap. So these are all the things that you can choose at the diagram template level, as well as the zoom factor and the grid snap. So these are things that a user could choose later and modify later, but this becomes the default for how the diagram works when they first open it up and they first do things. So this is a great thing to set up for whoever is going to use this diagram template. Thank you so much for your attention.